The rejection came before the door had fully closed, heavy and final, like the sound of hope dropping to the floor. Ethan Carter stood in the marble hallway with his worn resume still warm in his hands, knowing in his bones that this was another opportunity slipping away, another promise to his daughter he might not be able to keep. He had walked into the interview with quiet dignity and walked out with the familiar weight of failure pressing against his chest, unaware that within minutes, a moment would unfold that would stop an entire company in silence and change his life forever. Before the story continues, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of people who refuse to give up, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them most. Ethan had not always been a man defined by struggle. Once, he had been a skilled logistics manager with a steady income, a modest home, and a future that felt predictable in the best way. That life cracked apart the day his wife passed away suddenly, leaving him alone with a 6-year-old daughter named Lily and a grief so deep it made breathing feel like work. The months that followed were a blur of hospital bills, sleepless nights, and whispered reassurances to a child who kept asking when her mother would come back. Ethan learned how to braid hair with trembling hands, how to cook meals while helping with homework, and how to hide tears behind tired smiles. When the company he worked for downsized during an economic downturn, his name was on the list, and just like that, stability vanished. Every interview after that felt heavier than the last. Employers saw the gaps in his resume, the exhaustion in his eyes, and the way he sometimes checked his phone too often, making sure the daycare had not called. On the morning of this interview, Ethan had woken before dawn to prepare Lily for school, tying her shoes and packing a lunch he hoped she would eat. She hugged him tightly before leaving, telling him she believed he would get the job because he was the strongest person she knew. That belief stayed with him as he rode the bus across the city to the towering glass building of Harrington Global, a company whose name alone carried power. Inside, everything gleamed with wealth and certainty. Ethan sat among other candidates in tailored suits, his own jacket pressed but clearly old. When his turn came, he answered every question with honesty and quiet competence, explaining his experience, his willingness to work hard, and his need for stability. He did not beg, but he did not hide his reality either. When the interview ended, he sensed the decision had already been made. The polite smiles did not reach the eyes. Minutes later, he was gently but firmly told they were looking for someone whose availability better matched their needs. No mention of his skills, no acknowledgement of his years of dedication elsewhere, just another closed door. As Ethan walked toward the exit, the weight of everything he carried pressed down on him. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Lily needed new shoes. The fridge at home was almost empty. He paused near the elevator, steadying himself, unaware that several floors above, the CEO of Harrington Global, William Harrington, was reviewing the interview outcomes. William was a man the world saw as untouchable, a billionaire who had built an empire from nothing. Yet beneath the tailored suits and commanding presence lived a past he rarely allowed himself to remember, a past shaped by poverty, loss, and a father who had raised him alone after tragedy. William's attention was drawn to Ethan's file not because of failure, but because of something else. A note from one interviewer mentioned Ethan's honesty about being a single father and his quiet resilience. William felt an unexpected tightening in his chest. Memories surfaced of his own childhood, of waiting after school for a father who worked multiple jobs, of nights when dinner was whatever could be found, of promises whispered in the dark that things would get better. He stared at the security footage replaying in the room, watching Ethan leave the building, shoulders slightly slumped but spine still straight. Without fully understanding why, William asked for the interview footage to be replayed again. As he watched Ethan speak, something broke through the walls he had built over decades. He saw not weakness, but strength. He saw a man who had not given up, even when life had stripped him of nearly everything. The realization struck with painful clarity that the company he had built prided itself on innovation and humanity, yet had just turned away someone who embodied both. In a moment that stunned his executive team, William stood abruptly and left the room, moving through the corridors with purpose. Down in the lobby, employees and candidates moved as usual, unaware that a shift was about to occur. Ethan had reached the glass doors when a sudden commotion rippled through the space. Heads turned as William Harrington himself entered the lobby, his face pale, eyes glistening. The Billionaire CEO, known for his composure, stopped just a few steps from Ethan, overcome by emotion that spilled freely despite every attempt to contain it. The sight froze everyone. Conversations died mid-sentence. Security hesitated. William struggled to speak, but even without words, the message was clear. He was not crying for show, he was crying for a version of himself he had once been, for a system that had forgotten compassion, and for a man standing in front of him who reminded him of what truly mattered. The silence was heavy, reverent, and transformative. Ethan stood there, confused and deeply uncomfortable, feeling exposed in a room full of strangers. He did not understand why this powerful man was looking at him as if seeing something rare and precious. What followed was not an offer spoken aloud, but a gesture that changed everything. William placed a hand over his heart and nodded, signaling something far deeper than approval. He instructed his team to halt all decisions and reconsider, not just this interview, but the values guiding the company. That day, Ethan did not leave Harrington Global unemployed. He left with a job created specifically for him, a role that valued his experience and allowed flexibility for his responsibilities as a father. More than that, he left with dignity restored. News of the moment spread quickly through the company, not as gossip, but as a lesson. Employees spoke of it in hushed, respectful tones, reminded that behind every resume was a human being with a story. The changes did not stop there. William initiated company-wide reforms, creating programs for single parents, offering flexible schedules, and training leadership to recognize potential beyond polished appearances. For William, it was a reckoning. He began volunteering quietly, funding scholarships, and sharing his story with those who needed to hear it. For Ethan, life slowly began to steady. He moved into a small but brighter apartment, stocked the fridge without fear, and bought Lily the shoes she needed, watching her spin with joy as if the world had suddenly softened. Months passed, and Ethan grew into his role, respected by colleagues who admired his work ethic and humility. Lily visited the office once, her small hand tucked into his, eyes wide at the size of the building. She did not know the full story, only that her father had found a place where he belonged. At night, Ethan sometimes sat quietly after she fell asleep, thinking about how close he had come to giving up, and how a single moment of empathy had redirected his path. Just before the ending, please take a moment to comment and share what this story made you feel, because your words matter more than you know. The world often celebrates success as something loud and dominant, but this story lived in the quiet spaces, in the pause before an elevator door closed, in the tears of a man who remembered where he came from, and in the resilience of a father who refused to let hardship define his worth. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that compassion can exist even in the most powerful places, please like the video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement keeps these stories alive, and together, we can remind the world that sometimes, the greatest change begins with simply seeing someone.